I want to say is that I welcome you all again. There are times when the sound gets hinky. That is due not to anything on TAASA's tech part, on the webinar platform's part, and it has to do with weather. So if at any time anything goes hinky, please, the phone number and the access codes to getting into the webinar are listed at the very top of the chat box. So without further ado, I'm muted. I'm sorry. I forgot to unmute Lacey. So Lanie, so let me get Lanie unmuted and we're gonna go forward. Okay, just a minute. All right, Lanie, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Wonderful.
I'm assuming then that everybody else can hear Lanie. I'm going to mute myself. Lanie, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Working with LGBT plus Survivors of Sexual Assault webinar. My name is Lanie Rogers. I'm the LGBT plus Services Advocate here at Open Arms Rape Crisis Center and LGBT plus Services here in San Angelo, Texas. That's always a mouthful to try to get through. My job here is to ensure that all LGBT plus victims or clients get the help and resources they need to be successful, whether that's advocating for equal benefits or care, job or home search, finding an inclusive physician or therapist, or help with things like name and gender marker changes for the trans community. I'm also a member of the LGBT plus community. I identify as pansexual, which means I am attracted to the person no matter how they identify. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I have been married to my beautiful wife for exactly 3 weeks and 1 day as of today. And we have 7 beautiful children in our blended family from ages 6 to 28. I'd like to thank Wendy. Thank you so much, Wendy. You're amazing. And TAASA for allowing our agency to give this presentation to all of you. We have a lot of information to go through. Sometimes I can talk kind of fast. So if y'all need me to slow down, just let Wendy know. And Wendy, say, hey, slow down a little bit. I have a billion things to talk about, so I'll give it my best shot in this hour that we have. A little bit about Open Arms Rape Crisis Center and LGBT plus services. We're a nonprofit organization offering no-cost services to victims of sexual assault and to the LGBT plus community. Our mission is to create social change within the Concho Valley by providing prevention, education, advocacy, and a safe place to foster healing for survivors of sexual assault and gender discrimination. We envision a community that stands together against sexual violence and all forms of discrimination. As an agency that helps both victims of sexual assault and issues related to LGBT plus, we have seen a desperate need for more education within our own community and beyond related to this underserved population, especially now in this political climate. As a community, we rarely talk about how sexual violence affects us or what our community's unique needs are when it comes to preventing sexual assault and supporting and caring for survivors of sexual violence, especially related to the transgender community. Since I have been working in this position, I have developed this special place in my heart for the trans community because they are really suffering, and they are the ones that are reaching out to us the most to try to find any type of resources to help them in all different ways. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I'll keep it going. As Wendy said, feel free to type in your questions. If you don't get your questions answered today, please feel free to contact our office as well at any time, and we'll have our information at the end of this webinar. So today, by the end of training, we hope participants will be able to define terms associated with the LGBTQ identities and LGBT communities, describe the impact of bias and oppression on LGBTQ sexual assault victims and survivors, and describe issues and challenges that LGBTQ sexual assault victims survivors may face. And I will note, it's we use LGBT plus a lot at our agency, not just because it's in our name, but we feel like it's more inclusive to all in the community. So I'll kind of bounce back and forth with that. Some of the terms that when we'll go over, there are a ton of them, as most of you know. We're only going to go over a few today. Sexual orientation, an inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Gender identity, one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from their assigned at birth. A lesbian, a woman who is predominantly or exclusively attracted to women emotionally, physically, spiritually, and or sexually. Gay, a term identifying a man who is predominantly or exclusively attracted to men emotionally, physically, spiritually, or sexually. And bisexual, a term identifying a person who is attracted to men and women emotionally, physically, spiritually, and or sexually. Questioning refers to people who are exploring or questioning their sexual feelings, orientation, and or sexual identity, and who may be experiencing lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender feelings or urges. Transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gendered identity and or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. Very important to get those straight. Being transgender does not imply any specific sexual orientation. Therefore, transgender people may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. And for anybody who may not know, it gets confusing for the general public, especially. Female to male is when a person is assigned female at birth who transitions to live and identify full-time as a male. Male to female is a person assigned male at birth who transitions to live and identify full-time as a female woman. And the reason why earlier I said born male or female, it's very important to understand the difference, because what we used to think back in the day is when you're born, they look at you by your genitals and decide this is what you are. What science has come up with and what we have learned through more education is just because someone appears a certain way doesn't mean that that's how they feel inside. And so we've kind of changed the language a little bit to being assigned. So someone assigned them. So a doctor or midwife, etc., assigned that person to be male or female at birth. And I think it's not on here, but I think it's very important to add non-binary as well. Non-binary, also known as genderqueer, is a spectrum of gender identities that are not exclusively masculine or feminine, identities that are outside the gender binary. And the reason why I feel like it's very important for our personal reasons, are really professional. We have a youth group. It's called Space to Be Me. We started meeting every week on Wednesdays starting last September. And we've had approximately 25 youth that have come through our doors, and half of them either are non-binary in some way. And I personally am seeing it more often that, especially the younger generation between 12 and 15, I'm seeing a lot of them identifying as non-binary. In my own family, I have a 13-year-old trans nephew, and my 16-year-old daughter has come out as non-binary. And so I think that generation is a lot more educated than we were back in the day. They have a lot more information. And I think they're just starting to just be who they are, no matter where that fits in. They're really comfortable with that. And what it appears to me is that everybody else is kind of having to fall into place and educate themselves to understand where they are. I think it's amazing and beautiful myself. Okay, terms to avoid. We talked about this: born a man, biologically female, genetically female. The preferred is actually assigned male at birth or designated female at birth. Transgenders or a transgender, the preferred is actually transgender person. Transgendered, I hear that a lot even in the transgender community where they add that ED. It's actually just transgender. Passing, which is very problematic, not visibly transgender or visibly transgender. And sex change or pre-op or post-op, transition is definitely preferred, because what we have, being more educated and as we get more information, being transgender means a lot of things for a lot of people, and it's a very personal journey, and you don't necessarily have to have a sex change or be pre-op or post-op to be able to be transgender. And a few things that we talk about not doing, and I'll elaborate on these. First, don't ask a trans person a question you would not feel comfortable being asked yourself. You would be amazed at the stories that we hear from the trans community about this. For example, what bathroom do you use? Or what is your real name? As most of you know, when whatever the name was given at birth, for a lot of trans individuals, they consider that their dead name. And my trans nephew has told me multiple times, whenever he hears his dead name at school, it breaks his heart. It takes a piece of him away and just causes a lot of confusion and upsets him. And so another one is not calling them by, don't call them by their name or pronoun other than what they use. He also deals with at school, even though they know that what his wishes are, because he's only 13, he's at a big disadvantage to be able to demand that they call him by his name. And so he still hears them call him she and her and by his dead name, and it's just devastating to him. And so I think it's, for most people, that is not their authentic self, and so we really have to respect their wishes. If you don't know their pronouns and you're not sure, the best way to find out is just by asking. And if it's awkward saying, hey, what are your pronouns, which is understandable, what I do personally is, when I meet somebody and I'm not sure, I'll just go up to them and say, hi, my name is Lanie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. What's your name? Excuse me. Any person who is non-binary or transgender, they will not only know what to say when you ask them, but you will immediately get cool points for actually asking what their pronouns are. That makes them feel so good, and it immediately eases their mind. It makes them way more comfortable, because not only are you respecting that, you're also showing them that you kind of know something about something. And, you know, so many times, and we'll talk about that, and so many times, and the next one is they'll go to a professional, usually a doctor, they become a patient, and they go in to be treated by a physician, and the physician ends up being curious and asking very inappropriate personal questions to the transgender individual, asking about genitals, surgical status, sex life. I mean, extremely inappropriate questions. And the last thing a person wants to do when they go in to get help with whatever they need is to have to educate a professional. So knowing your patients before they come in is always super important. And we'll talk about this later, but one bad experience keeps them from going and getting help, whether it's a physician, whether it's a clinic, whether it's going to a clothing store, or going to their families and talking to their families. One bad experience makes them completely shut down. And now we'll talk about what is most important. The LGBTQ individuals are incredibly diverse and come from all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. It's important to respect how people self-identify, however that may be. And chances are you have been helped by trans individuals, or obviously there's LGBT plus individuals everywhere, whether it's in the doctor's offices or, you know, your lawyer, or, you know, and everything in between. And so respect it goes a long way. All right, a true or false question. Sexual assault in the LGBTQ communities isn't as serious an issue as in non-LGBTQ heterosexual communities. True or false? Obviously, it's false. Some examples of misperceptions from non-LGBT plus heterosexual communities is, men can't be sexually assaulted. Women can only be sexually assaulted by men. Lesbian couples are equally matched, and it's hot, in quotations. Trans individuals, especially sex workers, put themselves at risk, so they don't deserve what happens to them. That particular one happens a lot. And just some statistics. 44% of lesbians, 61%, that according to, let me back up. 44% of lesbians and 74% of bisexual women experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, compared to 35% of heterosexual women. 40% of gay men and 40% of bisexual men experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, compared to 21% of heterosexual men. And the more research we have done, these numbers fluctuate, but it's all obvious that this particular, especially the, according to the CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey found for LGBT plus people, it shows that 44% of lesbians, 61% of bisexual women, and 50% of transgender women report experiencing rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, compared to 35% of heterosexual women. And according to the National Center for Trans Equality 2015 transgender survey, the percentage shoots up to 72% for sexual assault victims of color, especially for those who have done sex work. 65% who have experienced homelessness, and 61% with disabilities. And within the LGBT community, trans people and bisexual women face the most alarming rates of sexual violence. Among both of these populations, sexual violence begins early, often during childhood. But it's been noted multiple times, and it's very important, that just because someone is sexually assaulted or experienced that early in childhood does not cause them to be LGBT. It does not cause them to be gay, although there have been statistics that say that there are a lot of mental and emotional feelings that go with that, and confusion among the gay community. As we talked about, the populations most at risk in the community are bisexual and transgender women, according to many sources, including the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Projects and the CDC's National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey. Excuse me. The 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey found that 47% of transgender people are sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. Among people of color, American Indian, 65%, multiracial, 59%, Middle Eastern, 58%, and Black, 53%. Respondents were most likely to have been sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Nearly half, that's 48% of bisexual women who are rape survivors, experienced their first rape between 11 and 17 years old. All right, before I get into the next part, Wendy, does anybody have any questions?
I don't see any at this time, so if y'all do, chat some in. Go ahead, there's nothing to do. All right.
Thank you. The cycle of violence, the LGBTQ cycle of violence is exacerbated by internalized and institutionalized homophobia and heterosexism. These present additional challenges to safety and help seeking. And I'll go over the definitions of both. Internalized homophobia refers to negative stereotypes, beliefs, stigma, and prejudice about homosexuality and LGBT people that a person with same-sex attraction turns inward on themselves, whether or not they identify as LGBT. This leads individuals to a host of issues, including self-hatred, bullying, confusion, and withdrawal, among many other things. Institutional homophobia refers to the many ways in which government, businesses, churches, and other institutions and organizations discriminate against people on the basis of sexual orientation. Institutional homophobia is also called heterosexism. Victims suffer from isolation, devaluation, and discrimination from their church once they're out. Businesses refuse to serve the LGBT community, plus community, citing religious convictions. I actually have a personal story related to this. My wife has 3 beautiful babies, and her ex-partner were together for 10 years. 6 years into their relationship, they weren't able to get married. It was still against the law. It was illegal for them to get married. It was also illegal for them to put 2 moms on birth certificates. And my wife's ex carried their babies. They went through in vitro. My wife actually picked the donor to look like her so that her ex, their children would have the best of both of them. And they actually look exactly like her. She has 6-year-old twins and a 9-year-old son. 5.5 years ago, they separated. And when they separated, my wife is considered the non-bio mom. At that time, she was given legal advice that there was nothing that she could do. And the best thing that she could do was hope that they could co-parent. And luckily, for the next 5.5 years, up until very recently, that's exactly what they did. They have not gone to court, but my wife has paid child support every month. She has visitation with them, very similar to Texas Family Code, although nothing is put in writing. Her kids have her last name hyphenated on their Social Security cards because that was one thing that they could do at the time. And everything was going great up until about a month ago. And my wife's ex informed her that she'll be getting married soon. And when she does, she is going to allow her new wife to not only adopt the children, but also to change their last name. You can imagine how devastating this has been for my wife and for myself, because my wife is their other mom, and that's what they call her. And we are terrified, and we are going through the court process, and we haven't gone yet. It's coming up, and she's terrified that because she has not had any rights up until this point, even though she has been co-parenting for the last 9 years, that the courts are going to say, sorry, you're non-bio mom, you have no rights. And so this is an example of inequality at its finest, not only for her to not be able to have her babies and her babies to have their mom, but also because her ex, having dealt with that herself her whole life, to use that to her advantage is really disheartening. And so we hope and pray for a good outcome. And moving on, how can someone get help? If someone is dealing with internalized homophobia or institutional homophobia, what they can do for themselves is examine it and understand it and address the impact it may be having on their lives. And the first step towards doing so is to find a mental health care provider who can help you identify it. It's wonderful if you can find, obviously, somebody in your community that is LGBT friendly and inclusive. But there are many that are not within the community, but are very knowledgeable. And how can we help as a whole is by identifying homophobia, not homosexuality, as the problem to be addressed. In conversations with friends and colleagues, speak out about homophobia. For many people, the only time they talk about LGBT people is in the context of homophobic jokes. Think about the similarities and differences between homophobia and other forms of oppression. Use what you know about racism, sexism, etc., to better understand homophobia and to look for ways to respond to it. Especially listen to the experiences of LGBTQ people and assume that their experiences with oppression is valid. Similarly, assume that the way in which LGBTQ plus people experience the world, they're different from the ways in which heterosexuals experience the world. They just are. Actively support anti-discrimination efforts, as well as campaigns to stop homophobic prejudice and violence. You know, we're lucky that we're in a little bit different climate. And so, you know, according to my wife's lawyers, she has a better chance at winning some type of visitation, and hopefully more than that, being recognized as the other parent over the last year. That's it. Like over the last year, things have been changing. So we do have some hope, but there's so much more that we need to do as a whole to fight for these inequalities just all the way around. All right, some issues and challenges that LGBTQ plus victims and survivors may face. We're going to go over quite a few of these. The first one is fear that the abuse will not be taken seriously because it is occurring within an LGBTQ plus relationship. An example of that is one lesbian woman recalled the following experiences with law enforcement after being physically abused by her girlfriend. The police came out 3 or 4 times. It was always a neighbor who called. They would just tell us to behave and that, you know, that we act like ladies. They didn't even ask for an explanation. They just told us to go, and, you know, whenever they would come, they would just say, you guys need to be quiet. When she was hitting me outside and they came and I was physically bruised, she didn't even try and explain it away at all. She just kind of stood there and the police left. They didn't do anything. Lack of acknowledgement and support from other LGBTQ plus individuals who may not be aware of the fact that sexual assault in LGBTQ plus relationships occurs and it's dangerous. This is due to a few different reasons. Among others, it goes back to the internalized homophobia and societal stigmas. It's either the norm or they feel in some way they deserve it. This is especially true in the transgender community. Fear of re-victimization by law enforcement, criminal justice, and social service workers based on one's sexual orientation and or gender identity. 85% of victim advocates surveyed by the NCAVP reported having worked with an LGBTQ plus survivor who was denied services because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Others report being completely ignored, or phone calls to different agencies not being returned when seeking help after sexual assault or partner domestic abuse. And that's not including trying to find different emergency shelters for especially the trans community to go to when something has happened to them. We're lucky here in San Angelo, we have one place where if we have a trans victim that needs somewhere to go, they actually put them up in a hotel room for their safety. And that's, they have tried to figure out a way to accommodate, and they haven't yet. We're hoping that they catch up, and they're really going to have to, because it's going to continue, especially the trend that I've seen with more of the youth coming out as non-binary. Fear of being outed to friends, family, employers, employees. An abusive partner may threaten to tell his or her partner's co-custodial parent, employer, friends, landlord, anybody and everybody that they can think of when they're in a same-sex relationship, resulting in fear of loss of children, employment, relationships, and housing. That is like a huge form of control for them. It's easy because that's why it's so prevalent within the LGBT community, because if somebody is not out and this is happening to them, they are completely controlled by fear. Fear that the abuser will convince people that they are the victim. A victim will stay in a relationship that they want to leave when the abuser will convince everyone that they love that they were the victim and alienate them from their family. For anybody in the LGBT community that already has a strained relationship with family and friends, this is definitely another way to control them. Other issues, reporting to police, ignorance and insensitivity, and treated with hostility. I would like to say that our police department does a really great job. I think some of them do, but even with heterosexual sexual assault victims, they still are so lacking sensitivity training. And it's even worse for the non-binary LGBT community. Here's an example, not here in San Angelo, but an example of that. A lesbian victim was sexually assaulted by another female while in college. They went on a date and they were watching TV, and the perpetrator was trying to put her hands down her pants, and she kept telling her no. She finally went down further and penetrated her with her fingers, and the victim was too afraid to say anything at that point. She just wanted it to be over. But after the perpetrator left, she reported it to the police. And when she reported it, they downplayed her story and what happened. And she said they were so perplexed by the fact that there was no penis involved. And she was made to feel embarrassed and ashamed, not only by them, but by fellow students in the LGBT community after confiding in them. They brushed it completely off and did not want to discuss it. So she was by herself. She dealt with this on her own, and from the beginning to the end. The forensic medical exam, trans victims especially may not be willing to seek health care that requires disrobing. This happens so much that they don't want to, because once they go in, they have a fear of not only being outed, but being ridiculed or denied care, which it happens all the time for them. So that's why they tend to not seek help. They suffer because of this. Medical providers and staff that lack training related to transgender individuals. Transgender person has to train professional at time seeking help. We've already talked about this. I bring it up again because it happens all the time. And it may not be the medical provider themselves. They may have seen this person, but their staff in front checking them in. I had a client that came in for help. She was a trans female, and they were using her dead name to check her in. And when they called her back, they used her dead name again. So you can imagine how embarrassing and traumatizing that is for a person that's seeking help to be misidentified like that. It was very traumatizing to her. Transgender survivors fear if they reveal their trans status, providers may express transphobia or even deny them access to survivor-related services. And that is one of the biggest fear, being outed and denied access to care. And we'll talk about it later, but all it takes is one bad experience, and they will not go back. If the victim is wearing prosthetics, police may keep them as evidence. This is not only costly for the victim, but very, very traumatic. They're re-victimized when their prosthetics, like wigs, genitals, breasts are kept as evidence. Many are unable to replace these items that are part of their identity due to the cost of the item. The replacement costs vary from anywhere from $25 to $400 on up. In addition, most areas don't have where you can just walk into a store and replace these items. A lot of times they have to go online and purchase them online and have to wait anywhere from 2 days to 2 months to get replacements. Crimes victims compensation, they do not cover prosthetics, although some sites say that creativity is key to helping clients find ways to apply for and accept compensation. So there may be ways. I don't have any ways, and I don't know if anybody has experience with that, but it does say that there are a few creative ways to help with that. Do we have any questions?
Not at this point.
All right, well, moving right along. All right, like we were saying, one bad experience may stop someone from seeking help. A couple of examples is it was very difficult for me to open up to anyone and admit what happened. And after the LGBTQ plus violence program intake worker denied me help, I wasn't able or willing to open myself up again. So I haven't sought or gotten any help. I tried to contact the Rape Crisis Center in the small town where I lived, but they did not return my call. And another example is in 2016, 39% of LGBT plus survivors interacted with law enforcement following an incident of intimate partner violence, according to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs. 7% said the police were hostile, and 12% said that the police were indifferent in their interactions. And another example of that is the transgender rights activist, Sarah McBride. She says she was sexually assaulted during her junior year of college in Washington, D.C., 6 months after coming out as transgender. She didn't report her assault to police and shared the incident with very few people. She said she remained silent, not only because she was worried people wouldn't believe her, but also because initially she wasn't sure what she believed herself. McBride said she had internalized transphobic messages about her self-worth, at one point thinking, "You're so lucky he's even interested in you." She also worried speaking out could harm the LGBT community at large by reinforcing myths that LGBTQ plus people are overly sexual. There are tips for including the LGBT plus community. one of the ways to do that is all forms that ask about gender or sex should allow clients to write in a response or include transgender and intersex options. It's important to make sure questions appropriately distinguish between sexual orientation, the gender someone is attracted to, gender identity, the internal sense of being man, woman, man, or gender nonconforming, and their sex. Always refer to the survivor by their preferred name and pronoun, even when speaking to others. If unsure what to call the person or pronoun to use, ask. And treat the knowledge that the person is LGBT plus as protected medial information subject to all confidentiality and privacy rules. Do not assume that people who are with the victim or the survivor know their gender identity or sexual orientation. Regarding all the forms, we have, since we adding the LGBT plus services a few years ago, and also having the Space to Be Me youth program, we have worked, it's a continuous process of looking at our forms and working to make improvements and changes as the need arises. I mean, things simple as when the kids or the youth are filling out their intake forms, instead of having mother, father as parents, having either parent or caregiver. I mean, make it more inclusive. Even for my own self, you know, when they have two moms or two dads or one that's non-binary, we want to make sure that it's all inclusive for everyone. On our bathrooms, instead of having male or female here at Open Arms, we actually have gender neutral bathrooms, and we change that signage. So little things like that can make a huge difference. And at the end of this webinar, I have included an amazing website that gives information and tips for inclusive forms and policies. And that's the link is on the end of the webinar. Another great website that gives information and tips on how to make facilities, especially like shelters, more inclusive is forgeforward.org, and it's pretty amazing too. It actually goes into even lists things that may be needed for different people in the LGBT community. So it's pretty cool. And it's important to make sure all areas of your office know how to address clients using proper names, pronouns on charts, and ensure all employees address them appropriately. In my experience, if a client brings a support person with them, and it happens all the time, I will ask the client if they would like to meet individually, and also if they have somebody, I ask permission to speak freely about confidential information before we even begin, because it's very important. They may want them in for support, but they may not want them to know everything. And so it's very important right up front to ask them if it's okay to do that. And discussion question, I'm curious at what issues and challenges do LGBTQ plus victim survivors face in your community? And does anybody have any questions related to resources available? We here at Open Arms actually have a running resource list for both the LGBT plus community in general, but I've also made one and continue to make one specifically for the transgender community.
Lanie, can you explain a little bit more about the resource book that y'all use, or how you made it and what's in it?
We have somebody, it's throughout the years. We've done it a few different ways. It's by word of mouth. I love the community that I work for, because anybody that I help or anybody that calls in looking for help, If we don't have the answer, we find it. And sometimes if they find it before we do, or they have a really good experience somewhere, they'll actually call us, because I'll let them know, hey, if you find that answer, if you find somebody to help you, if you have a great experience somewhere, please call us and let us add it to the resource list. And I've had quite a few clients that have done that for us. We've also cold calls. We made cold calls. We actually broke out the white pages and the yellow pages and just went through yellow pages. I forget because I like to Google myself, and actually went through it business by business and called them and not only asked them if they were LGBT friendly and inclusive, we would ask them a specific question about their services. For example, we know a lot of businesses are going to say, yeah, absolutely, we're inclusive. But if you go on to say, if a gay couple came into your business and wanted a cake made, would you make that for them? So we ask them a hard question because we feel like at that point, we will really know better, at least, if they are and indeed friendly. We have not experienced anybody actually tell us outright that for religious reasons or other reasons that they couldn't, but we have had a few people that have stumbled on that question. And so it's very important for us as we make our list to be comfortable with sending somebody there. And so you really do have to ask the hard questions before you subject somebody to that, especially when they're coming to you for that advice or help.
The other question is, Brenda wanted to know if you're willing to share that resource list.
Absolutely. We can give them what we already have. I'm writing it down to send it to you. The resource list. It's mostly pertaining to the San Angelo and surrounding areas. We do have some national phone numbers, like a national hotline that is specifically for the trans community, run by trans individuals. But most of them are within our community and surrounding areas. But we will for sure be willing to share that information.
Okay, next question. Do you have any Spanish language resources for the LGBT plus community?
We do have some resources for the community. That's one thing that we're working really hard to expand on. But we do have some from pamphlets to some agencies in town that we can give resources to.
And I'm adding on a PS here, and I'm sorry, there is an agency in Houston that is totally monolingual Spanish in there and works with the LGBTQ plus community. And I will get that to you, Lanie, and you can send that out to everybody as well, or I'll send it out to everybody as well. I have everybody's email addresses.
Yes, please, because I would like that information as well.
Okay, happy to share that. Next question, will you be doing other webinars on this subject and others? And it's funny because we had talked about that. Lanie, go ahead.
Yes, I would love to. Actually, I talked about it before, but I have a very special place in my heart for the trans community. One of the things that I do is here in town is we do a Trans 101. We also have an LGBT 101. We're doing a lunch and learn next month on non-binary. And we offer it to community, but we also will go to different, we've gone to the hospital. The hospital has come to us. They've sent representatives so that we can educate some of their staff. That same thing with the college. I mean, we've done a lot of different, we've had a lot of different educational opportunities to do that. And we love it. We love to do it. So I would love to be able to do something like that.
Okay, and there is a comment that says all LGBT plus survivors in our community have faced all systems problems.
Yes.
And yeah, yeah. You know, it occurs to me, I don't do direct services anymore, but what I was thinking would have been helpful to me when I was doing direct services was maybe having a forum, if you will, if we could, a roundtable, if you will, if we can do that as a webinar on discussing the problems and talking about that. And I don't know if that's something you'd be willing to facilitate, or if that's something that the attendees would like, so that they can ask questions and they can, you know, get answers, or all, you know, whatever it is. So I'm going to leave that all up to you. But once you get your evaluation from us, you can put that in there as what your suggestions are. And Lanie, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I would definitely be willing to be involved in the roundtable forum.
Okay. And another question is, what is an easy way to teach children about LGBTQ community?
I think for me is being very honest and direct, depending on their age. If they see someone in the community holding hands and don't understand, which we've had that, you know, I have personally dealt with that. You know, my wife and I have a kayaking business, and the Girl Scouts came and were on the water, and one of the girls asked, you know, do you have a husband? And I said, no. And she said, well, is she your sister? And I said, no. And I was very careful because we live in West Texas. And although I am very out and we hold hands, you know, in a professional setting, it's a little bit harder to know what is okay with the parent and what's not. And it opened up a discussion for the parent to take over. And we actually talked to the parent afterwards, and it was a great experience. I think if they are not exposed to it in their daily life, there's so many books out there that are matter of fact. I think making it seem very normal that love is love is, for me, as a parent of 7 children, and I was in a heterosexual relationship for many years. And so I, you know, taught my children, you know, love is love, you love who you love. And it wasn't a big deal for them being exposed to that in their lifetime. It was no different. And so that's how, in my experience, worked for me.
Okay, I don't see any more questions that have come in at this point. We do have a few minutes left. Lanie, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Well, I would just like to say that I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to share and to give information related to the LGBT community. Having outside looking in, for me, not having grown up being in that community, having the privilege of being in heterosexual relationships and not dealing with the discrimination that I deal with now, being with my wife. And it's very interesting. We've been together for 5 years, and to experience those things for the first time, I handle it differently than she does, having been, you know, identified as lesbian her whole life. She dealt with a lot of discrimination, and it was interesting to see the difference of how it affected her versus me. I seem to be able to take it, but she has internalized so many things that it's harder for her. She's way stronger than she used to be, and we get our strength from each other. But it made me realize what the people in the LGBT community deal with, and how things that have happened with them throughout their whole lives bring them to where they are today, whether it's the reactions or the way that they live their life. And it's very important for us to really delve deep. We haven't walked a mile in their shoes. We don't know what it's like for them. But I think all of us that are advocates or are in the field, I think that we already have a loving, caring heart because we want to help people. And God knows it's not for the money, but, you know, being able to to try to empathize with them on the deepest level. I mean, if we all did this, the world would be a lot better place. But unfortunately, it's not that way. And so it's so much needed. Equality for everyone is so needed. And for everybody to, in this forum and everywhere, to educate themselves. If you don't understand something, that's okay. If you don't know all the answers, it's okay. If you call somebody by the wrong pronouns, but you're trying, it's okay. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to look at you as some evil person. If you are trying to do the right thing, if you're trying to say the right thing, if you're trying, that's all you have to do. That means the world to anybody and everybody in the LGBT community, to know that you're trying your best to include them. That's what counts the most.
Okay, is there anything else that anybody wants to share or ask or whatever? I am posting this webinar has been recorded and it will be posted on TAASA's YouTube channel within the next 10 business days. So if there's anything else that anybody wants to share or add right now, that's it. Thank you for your attendance. And Lanie, thank you for an awesome presentation.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate you giving this opportunity.